Hey everybody, I'm Alistair Horscroft from the Mind Academy, and this is Rob Mack, also from the Mind Academy, and also runs his own private practice. And we're going to spend an hour talking you through what neurofeedback is and why you should be doing it. Hey Rob, how are you, mate?
I'm wonderful, Al. Really looking forward to this.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a great hour. Okay. So I think the trajectory of this hour is going to be I'm going to explain what neurofeedback is, explain the different approaches to it, why people should do it, our personal experiences, its comparisons to things like hypnosis and, say, meditation, and then kind of how to get involved with neurofeedback either by oneself or with us. Sound like a good hour?
Sounds like a great hour.
All right, man. So here it goes. What is neurofeedback? Okay, so neurofeedback is basically a technology that's been around since the 60s, and it is an extraordinary technology that allows us to both measure and train brain waves. That's really what it is. Okay, and how do we do that? Well, we do that through various bits of equipment that we can purchase. Okay, and these bits of equipment allow us to basically read the brainwave patterns in real time of what's happening in each of the lobes of your brain. Now, why would we want to do that? Well, we would want to do that because unfortunately, most of us don't have optimal brainwave patterns, okay? And the question is, well, why don't we have optimal brainwave patterns? And I think the easiest way to understand that is if he was around, oh, he is around, hang on a second, I'm going to delight you here because yesterday I got myself a I got myself a lovely new puppy. So you guys can meet Biscuit, and Biscuit is going to basically talk us through neurofeedback, okay, and really what it's about. And so I've got Biscuit here, okay, and I want you to imagine that, maybe Biscuit pees on the rug. He's been in the house for, a week, or no, he hasn't. He's been in the house 3 days actually, and he pees on the rug. So basically, there's three options as to what's going to happen. The first, we can shout at Biscuit and lose our shit at Biscuit and dysregulate, and then Biscuit freaks out about being, you know, peeing on the rug. Okay. Or when he pees on the rug, I can go, oh, well done. I can cuddle him and tell him he's amazing for peeing on the rug. And again, we have a problem. Well, the third option would be to really not do too much about it and then encourage him to pee where I want him to pee and reward him where, he pees. And then I'm going to train him to basically do what he needs to do. So now imagine this with a young child. And the young child is at home. He's got a mum and a dad. And the young child spills some milk. What is the appropriate thing to do when the milk is spilled? Well, the appropriate thing to do is for an adult to go, oh, look, the milk spilled. Let's clean it up. Really, not much emotion because spilling the milk doesn't really require much of an emotional response. But the most common thing that's going to happen is likely the mother is going to over coddle and go, oh, don't worry. You don't worry about spilling the milk. Oh. And then over love the kid for doing something like spilling the milk. And maybe the dad is going to lose his shit and go, oh, I can't believe you spilled the milk and make a big drama over it. Either are non-optimal responses. Okay. Now you can take those analogies of either Biscuit the dog or the spilt milk and take that to any kind of childhood development where the brain is being trained. Is the brain being trained appropriately to the situation, to the person, to the food, to the, school, to the work, it's to anything, yeah? And is the brain being trained to basically what we call, go into what we call a hyper mode, like a kind of stressful, agitated, anxious mode, or is the brain being treated to go into a kind of apathetic, depressed, worried, concerned mode? Okay. And unfortunately, even if we have the best parents in the world, we live in a world where, the world's tricky. And so in early developmental stages, our brains can basically be trained to be non-optimal and to do non-optimal responses to any number of situations or people or situations. And one of the ways in which the brain does that is by basically brainwave patterns. In these dysregulation, that's what it's called when we're not in a optimal zone, which I'm going to talk to you about in a moment. It's called dysregulation. And in a dysregulated state, we just don't perform optimally. It's kind of really that simple. And so the brainwave patterns, as we're going to show you, let us know whether the brain is optimal or non-optimal in regards to, how it responds or reacts to particular situations. So a way of understanding that is if I've got my little drawing that we did here for you, And in psychology, arousal basically means kind of activity, and we can either have what we call hyper arousal, which is overactivity, or hypo arousal, which means underactivity, or what we could have optimal arousal, which would be the range of resilience, the optimal zone, or the regulation zone. Now, the brain, because the brain is basically an efficiency mechanism, it's always trying to get into the green zone. In fact, most people are always trying to get into the green zone. Why? Because it feels great. When we're in this green zone, this zone of resilience and regulation, we feel good, we feel in the flow, we're creative, we're regulated, we think we can do things, there's plenty of space in our mind, our emotions are on point, our thinking's on point, and that's just where we are productive and capable and all the good things. But unfortunately, due to the things that I just said, various versions of the spilt milk that get escalated, well, unfortunately, that's not what happens. And so what most people do are bouncing between hypo, which is understimulation or underactivity, into hyper, which is overstimulation or overactivity. And they're just bouncing between these two things and occasionally passing through this wonderful green zone, but certainly not hanging around there. We could think about it, we come home from work and we're anxious and agitated. We've had a bad day. People have stressed us out. We're up here in the red. So what do? We have wine, we have a joint. And because why? Because we're trying to bring ourselves down. We're trying to bring ourselves down into here. But then normally, whoop, we bring ourselves too down. And we go, shit, I'm feeling a little bit too hypo. Oh, well, give me some Ritalin or some speed, or give me some coffee or some, Coke Zero to bring me up again. And so we bounce around like that. The same with food. Some food makes us go like that. So we try and take some food that does that and bounce around. And then even in relationships, oh, this relationship is getting a bit boring. Oh, I need to stir it up a little bit and get some activity. Oh, this relationship's too exciting and too much. I need to bring it down a little bit and bring it down here. And so in every area of life, most people, unfortunately, are just bouncing up and down. It was interesting. The new information that's just come out now about kind of Hillary Clinton and really her social problems, should we say, and how she really appears to have a characteristic of someone who's pretty manic. Loads of anger and rage up here, and then loads of withdrawing and apathy and a dead eye down here. Very rarely here. So she's been taking all these medications to try and spend some time here because her brain is so out of whack that it just bounces around here. And that brings us on to the next thing, which is medication itself. Most medications are trying to take a brain that is under aroused or underactive and then give it a boot, or a brain that's over aroused and overactive and trying to slow it down so that people can have some kind of bandwidth of regulation. So a lot of information there, I understand, but it's important to set a context because what neurofeedback does is it allows us to retrain the brain out of either kind of apathetic, slow patterning or out of hyper over patterning into this lovely green band. And when we do that, to be honest, we just feel great. We feel amazing. And the way we do that is, like I said, is we do that with certain technology that we're going to explain to you and do a screen share with in a moment to explain exactly how we do that. But before I go any further, Rob, anything to add?
Um, it's a really good take. And personally, I have the experience of being in either the red or the blue. And my own personal journey was that there was a time where there was medication because I was in too blue, and then I was given more medication because I was too red. And I spent many, many years trying to find a way through my mind to get to the green. And it wasn't very successful. As you would remember, one of the first times we met, I was very much in the red. And as I continued to do my work and get an understanding of what your approach to both hypnotherapy, coaching, and NLP, the journey has been into this realm of neurofeedback training, and the results for me have been profound. No longer medicated in any sense, other than good food, nutrients, and some minerals, and to such an extent that with your support, I've gone on this journey and really excited to be able to talk about it and offer it to a wider audience.
Well, you've gone on the journey so thoroughly that you now train other people's brains
Yes.
and teach them how to use their mind. Yeah, thanks, Rob. Yeah, wonderful. And I think we could talk about that a lot, and I think it'd be great to talk about that a little bit later. Your own personal experience, because it is. But I think your personal experience does lead us into the next important bit of information, because it is true. When I met Rob on our course on day one, this lovely man, highly intelligent, very insightful, huge amount of knowledge, huge amount of experience. And yet, with all of that, still unfortunately medicated, struggling, with the oscillations of mood and hyper and hypo. And it takes one to know one, because I was that man as well. It's like we kind of pass the baton, don't we? And so, 20 years ago, if you met me 20 years ago, I mean, yeah, well, probably 25 years ago, to be honest, but yeah, it wasn't great. With phobias, anxiety, OCD, pick my skin till I bled, bouncing around when I was a teenager, used to take drugs to get high and then to get low to balance out, the whole kind of shebang. And now very much similar to you, no meds, no, just feel great and incredibly regulated. And I can prove that, in a screen share a little bit later, just how much the brain has changed. But I think it begs the question that we need to talk about with neurofeedback, because neuro is obviously of the brain. And I think it's really important that we talk about the distinction between the mind and the brain, because people put those as the same thing, and they're not. They're two very different things that interrelate. And the easiest analogy that we can give you, well, the easiest metaphor is a computer. So a computer, you've got your hardware, your microchips and the processors, and that would be like the brain. And then you've got the software, which is like the operating system, and the apps, and that would be like your mind. So your mind would be things like your identity and your beliefs and your memories and your acquired knowledge. But your brain is what processes all that information. Yeah. So the easiest way to understand it is, say, for example, I had, the best software in the world, the most amazing software, but I was trying to run it through a clunky, 1970s computer that didn't quite match. We could see that we just wouldn't process the information successfully. It didn't matter how good the information was. Yeah. But equally, if we've got this amazing bit of hardware, this totally up to date, bit of hardware, but we're running really crappy software, really bad beliefs and values and really bad identity, and keep ourselves getting into shitty information, well, we're not going to function well either. And so the truth about all change is it requires the optimization of both the mind and the brain. And pretty much all clinical psychology, and all psychotherapy, and even a lot of unfortunately badly trained hypnosis and NLP, it doesn't do it can't do what it's meant to do. It's so mind orientated that it completely forgets what's processing the mind, which is the brain. Which is why, personally, for me, for the last decade, I've integrated both mind and brain training. So you can do an awful lot with the mind. Like there is this area of psychology called self-directed neuroplasticity, and that is the attempt of the mind to repattern the brain, so for the software to change the hardware just using the mind. And it is possible, but for most people it's hard yards and it's not consistent, and it kind of just doesn't work. And that's kind of obvious, because even though everyone talks an amazing game, every Facebook meme is about neuroscience and neuroplasticity. I'm like, great. Are you still anxious? They go, yeah. Wait, you still, yeah. You still OCD? Yeah. You still med, yeah. So even with all the knowledge in the world, even the professors of this, do you know what I mean? Like Andrew Huberman, he seems like a lovely man, but he's obviously a gentleman with relatively obvious concerns. So even a leading neuroscience obviously isn't able to do the things that he is meant to be able to do. And I think this is because of what we just mentioned. No one is training the mind and the brain. And today we're going to talk mostly about the brain, but I hope we've made it clear this distinction. I think what Rob just said was a little bit earlier about arriving with all of this amazing mind knowledge, but not able to process successfully through the hardware. Do you want to talk about that for a second again, mate?
Yeah. So it comes with the insight, like from the neurofeedback training. once I was introduced and got my brain mapped, which we'll talk about and show examples of down the track, I could physically see what was happening in my hardware that was not allowing the mind work to take hold or to pattern in, to use an NLP term, that I had spent years and years of talking and processing and doing, yet for a brief moment, there'd be a change of state. I would feel good. I'd be in the zone. Yet the moment I was back in the real world or in another situation, some old pattern would come in and all the work I'd previously done, I was back to feeling highly anxious or very depressed. And it was with this technology, firstly, to be able to understand and see for myself how my brain was doing anxiety and doing depression. And from there, that's when things started to really change.
Yeah, fantastic. Fantastic. I think it's really important to understand that it's not that some therapy doesn't work and it's not that some coaching doesn't work, but it's suited to certain things. And there's a whole load of things that it just isn't suited to. I've always maintained that change is trained, not talked. Yeah.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is when people just talk about their problems, we classify that as rumination. And all rumination does is really just embed more and more of the same problem patterns in the brain. Then what people do is they'll go to a well-meaning therapist, and the therapist will say some ingenious thing or some amazing thing that will give the client this insight. And they think that the insight is amazing, and they'll keep on going back because they get addicted to these insights about themselves or about their problem, but they've still got the problem. Yeah. So now the truth of the matter is I am still a huge fan, predominantly of hypnosis and neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP, and I use those to resolve a lot of things in my life. I use those to resolve my phobias, anxiety, to help me become more successful, to get a better sense of self, no doubt. Yeah, but they did hit a ceiling. They did hit a ceiling, and there were certain things that not even those things, and with all of my years and skill, could get me through. And so when I started integrating that with neurofeedback, all of a sudden, wow, it was chalk and cheese. But the other thing is true as well, as I've met a lot of people who just do the brain training without the mind training, and they get okay results, but they don't get these huge leaps of amazing, significant change. Rob, is that your experience?
Absolutely. And predominantly the field that I work in using hypnotherapy and neurolinguistic programming is in addiction. And with addiction comes anxiety and depression and other labels that are put out there. And without a doubt, they are effective approaches and there are outcomes. And I work with a lot of people that now experience sobriety. Yet there are at times a definite ceiling, as you mentioned, because the brain is still operating in a way that once it comes into a context or a situation, there are old patterns. It's like old software fires up, and the new hardware it isn't compatible. And
Yeah.
what I found is working with people in the addiction space, the success rate of long-term sobriety increases by about 30+% with a combination of change work and neurofeedback training.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, yeah. I certainly found with neurofeedback, it did one thing that all my hypnosis, NLP, and therapy could never do, and that is with therapy and coaching, I could often get this kind of emotional relief. Yeah, and so I would feel emotionally relieved, and it would feel amazing. With neurofeedback, I felt like literally the hardware was defragged. Do you know what I mean? I felt like I had more space. So there's a big difference between emotional release and creating, as it were, I suppose your RAM and you know what I mean? Like your drive is just a cleared, you know what I mean? And so there's more space. And so therefore you have this amazing ability to operate from a greater place of freedom and capacity.
And that's the big one there, freedom and capacity, Al.
Yeah.
The experience I've had for myself is there realistically within 30 days, 30 to 40 training sessions, as promised by the information that I'd read, there were truly those light bulb moments of noticing that I was in a pattern that I never was before. And it was just out of curiosity that I was noticing what I was doing differently. The level of focus, the level of attention, the level of energy, the way I was able to maintain that sense for a longer period of time than I'd ever experienced in my adult life. It's quite
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah. Amazing, mate. Yeah. So good. So good. Amazing. Amazing. So let me talk you through a session, how a session goes, and then we'll go and kind of give you more detailed information after I've spoken so that you can kind of land what we're talking about. So there are lots of different bits of neurofeedback kit that you can purchase, okay? And over the years, I've purchased an unbelievable amount and both wasted a lot of money and benefited by spending a lot of money over the years, okay? And there are some neurofeedback kits that are just absolutely useless, and there are some that really are quite extraordinary. But what was amazing is 10 years ago, I signed up with a company and we brought their top of the line Rigidigi thing for about 15,000 US dollars. And it was great, but it was incredibly hard to use. You know, it was like this skull cap with 24 electrodes on it, and you had to use this gel on each electrode. And basically, you're kind of juggling all these different aspects, and getting a reading was really difficult. And so it took ages to utilize, and it was clunky. But now, recently, you know, the company that we work with has partnered with a very famous company. So there's a famous company called Muse. And I got a Muse about 10 years ago, and it was okay. It was like this kind of nice meditation thing that made you feel a bit better, but didn't really do much more than that. And so when this company said, "Oh, we use the Muse headset," I was like, "Really?" And like, "Yeah, but we've added a few things to it. And we've also created this incredible software which basically superpowers it." So it's kind of like taken this, what I thought was like a 5 out of 10 product, and it's kind of taken it into like an 11 out of 10 product. It's quite extraordinary. So just as a little bit of a press pause, just because I said it's a Muse, I wouldn't just go out and buy a Muse, you know, because you're not going to get what we're able to do with just a Muse. And we'll talk more about that later. Okay. But let me just give this as an example, and then I'll talk about other headsets in a moment. So what happens in the neurofeedback experience is basically there's two things that we're basically looking to do. The first is we're going to basically do something called a brain map, which we're going to screen share with you now. So if I can get onto my app here,
While
and
you're doing that, while you're just organising that, Al, it's good to
yeah.
mention that when you spent your $17,000 on a helmet,
Hmm.
there was no way that you as an individual could do all of it yourself. Whereas with this piece of equipment, it's self-serving. You don't need to come into a clinic. You don't need to have a long extended session and lots of gunk being put all over your head. This is something that can be done at home and with or online with us, and we talk you through it. So it's a very efficient, effective, and fascinating way to do it compared to what I gather was very clunky in the day.
Very clunky. So the first, thanks, mate. It's very, very true. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to use this piece of software to do something called a brain map, which is where we're going to use about 9 different locations on your head. And from those locations, we're going to basically read what your brain is doing in real time. Okay. There's also some questionnaires we use as well, just to cross-reference with your brain. Then in about half an hour, we're going to get some extraordinary information known as a brain map. And this is what a basic brain map looks like. And then we can go into more detail and layer down into all the different brain waves in your brain. Yeah, we can look at your delta, theta, you know, alpha, high alpha, mid alpha, low beta. So there's a lot of information there, but I don't want to overwhelm you with that right now. I want to just look at this one main map here. Okay. Now this map is, you know, my brain about, what would you say, about 6 weeks ago, Rob? Probably about 6 weeks ago.
Yeah, it was towards the end of April, I believe we did it. So
Yeah.
yeah, somewhere around there. Yeah.
Now, the interesting thing about this brain map here is the 2 nights before this brain map, I'd been boxing and I'd got a concussion during boxing. Hadn't defended myself very well, and a rather large lad gave me a nice concussion. Didn't mean to, but that's the way that it was. I hadn't slept for a few nights. But even with that, my brain is still doing remarkably well because I've trained my brain, over the years pretty successfully. Now, when you're looking at a brain map in very, very rudimentary terms, you're kind of looking to kind of go green, for want of a better way of saying things. A little bit like in our, map that I showed you earlier, with the green, we're looking to kind of go green. Red means overactivity and blue means basically underactivity, and yellow is moving towards overactivity and light blue is moving towards underactivity. And so we could say that green is just the right amount of activity, for want of a better way of saying things. And so we can basically work out what your is happening in your brain, and that lets us know everything from the kind of issues or symptoms that you're experiencing to the underlying kind of aspects of really what's going on. From a brain map, we could, even without knowing who you were, if we were sent a brain map and we didn't know who you were, we would better work out whether you had ADHD, ADD, depression, anxiety, OCD, focus problems. We'd better work all those things out without even knowing you, because the brain would tell us that you have those things. So then what we would do is this amazing bit of software that we use has basically millions of sessions of brains that have been mapped over the years. And they have created basically kind of what an optimal brain would look like in any given situation. And then we can look at your brain waves, and then we can set what we call a training program to basically train your brain waves so they look like the optimal brain waves. And in doing so, a whole lot of problems just begin to fall away. Why? Because remember our map of bouncing between hyper and hypo. When we train the brain to be in the green zone of optimal regulation, it doesn't do the problems. And the problems are basically either a hyper or a hypo activity problem. And so they literally begin to disappear. Okay, so quite extraordinary. I'm going to go off this map in a second, but I like to show off this one, and Rob loves it when I show off this because I think it is a really cool little thing. Is when you do the brain map, you are set various tasks that you have to do whilst doing the map. And one of the tasks really is just finding out how well you remain regulated under kind of pressure or stressors. Okay, so there's like a little 10-minute moment where you're kind of like in many ways being agitated by certain sounds, and it's basically looking to see how well your brain remains calm. Now you have to remember that I just had concussion, I hadn't slept for 2 nights, but even that, my task performance are almost optimal. Like, so I am very superior across the board in my ability to maintain regulation, even in regards to stress responses, which is like what a fighter pilot or a sniper or an amazing sports person or a chess master. That's the kind of brain that they want. Now, the funny thing here, and the reason is, even though it sounds like I'm going off on a massive ego rant, I'm actually doing the opposite. Because the truth is I didn't really do anything to achieve this. Yeah, that's what's so funny about brain training is I can't really lay claim to doing anything to have achieved this. The only claim that I can make is that I was able to train my brain for around 20 minutes to 30 minutes, yeah, for about 4 to 5 times a week for a 6 week period. So I ran about 40 to 50 training sessions. So my only hero moment is I was able to consistently train my brain for 6 weeks. That's all I did. And then this is the outcome of that. And I think that's very important to share with you because I want you to understand that this isn't about, oh, that brain's amazing or that brain isn't amazing. It's rather like if you take my puppy again, Biscuit, that I just showed you. Biscuit is just Biscuit. It's whether Biscuit is well trained or badly trained. And so a lot of people, they blame themselves for the problem. And it's not really you, it's just how your brain has been trained. And so I'm going to hand it over to Rob in a moment, but just to sum up, the first thing that we're going to do when we do neurofeedback is use this device. It's a device, and we're going to get some gel on this electrode, and we're going to basically go to 6 locations on your head, and we're going to use also on the inside of this are some reading plates as well, and that's going to give us that brain map. And that's going to let the system know how we're going to train your brain, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, to get it into that optimal green zone so that your problems just begin to fade away. And not only do problems fade away, your high performance self begins to reveal itself, because that's really important to understand. Everyone's so obsessed with resolving problems that they're forgetting the aim. And the aim is not to resolve problems. The aim is to optimize yourself. The aim is to become the best version of yourself. And we just resolve problems because they're the annoying things in the way of that happening. But the whole therapy world and even the coaching world, to be honest, focuses so much on problems that no one has half a chance of becoming the optimal version of themselves. And I can assure you, becoming your optimal version is the goal. Resolving problems is not the goal. That's just the annoying thing you have to do to get to your goal of being your optimal self. Rob, over to you, mate.
Thanks. And it's worth noting, like, just going back to what you're saying about that, the state of your brain, even though it had a concussion, and we could actually see where the concussion had occurred.
Mm.
And when we compare it to physical training, the fact is the training that you had done in that period was sustained. It wasn't as though just because you stopped, your brain suddenly went back to what it was 20 years ago. And even with a concussion, there was evidence, there's physical evidence that we can see in the map, yet it was only in the area where the concussion was, whereas all the other areas were primarily still in prime condition. And that's one of the fascinating things that I found with neurofeedback is when we get the map, not only are we able to compare it to millions of maps, but those maps are also categorized. So there is evidence that explains and shows an atypical depressed brain or an atypical ADHD or an atypical peak performer, an alpha state. So there is very, if no, guesswork at all, which is the beautiful part of this program is even doing the study and getting the certification and continuing the training, I'm not having to reinvent or guess or assume or think, well, what's best for this individual based on my experience? Rather, it's, well, there's a brain map in front of me. And compared to the general population, this is where it sits in the band of not optimal to optimal. Mm-hmm. And therefore, we're able to functionally make changes. So we're not talking about the structural brain in the sense of how it's structured and all the different elements, but the functionality of how one's brain operates both when it's stimulated and when it's rested. And that shows up in these delta, theta, alpha, and beta ranges. And each part of the brain has these frequencies running through it. And the power of this technology is in its simplicity of discipline, 3 to 5, minimum 3, optimally 5 times a week for about 20 minutes, doing something that apparently we shouldn't do, which is just look at our screen and not have to think.
Yeah.
So we actually have an excuse to pick up our phone and look at a screen because this is all driven on an app, which is either Android or Apple. And the protocols are run from the back end. The training programs that we put together are deployed via that. And no longer do we have to go into a clinic, make travel time, sit down, put helmets on, and the like. It's literally, and this is part of what we will talk about later, a program where once the habit is there and installed and there is an outcome, then it's nothing more than picking up the headset, turning it on, launching an app, and having 20 minutes to oneself.
Well, let's talk about that 20 minutes to oneself. Yeah, so I think that's a great segue in. So we've discussed the brain map itself, which allows us to know what we have to do. So the next thing is what do we do with that information? Okay. Well, I like to think about it this way. The way that we train a dolphin or we train a dog is with operant conditioning, where we reward it. If we want to train a dog to sit, we normally use a treat. Dolphin jump it through a hoop, gets a fish. Okay. And so it's a reward-based mechanism. And your brain is a reward-based mechanism. And it likes efficiency, it likes order, it likes dopamine rewards, it likes a bit of novelty, it likes to evolve. And so it really loves to be rewarded. And that's the secret to neurofeedback. And so what we do is once we know how your brain runs, we can set a parameter to basically train specific brain waves into their optimal usage for the brain. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's take an atypical case study. Okay, let's say, for example, we've got someone and they've got low focus, a little bit kind of ADD with attention, and they're pretty emotional a lot there. So they've got a lack of focus, lack of attention, and they're easily dysregulated because they've got too much emotion. Now, this is a very big generalization, but out of the five brainwave patterns, we've got gamma, which is the fastest and the largest number of brainwave patterns. Then we've got beta, which is our kind of focus, kind of functioning in the moment, kind of getting stuff done brainwave patterns. Then we've got alpha, which is, kind of relaxation, a bit more inward, kind of calm, creative, brainwave patterns. Then we've got theta, which is kind of like deeper brainwave patterns where we can kind of have deeper memory, deeper connection to self. And then we've got delta, which is often when we're asleep or unconscious. Okay. And that's very generalized. If someone has that state that I said, it's highly likely they've got what we call slow alpha or problem alpha in their prefrontal cortex. So they've got not enough activity in their prefrontal cortex. And they've probably got too much beta or bad beta or high beta in what we call their occipital area or their limbic system or their reptile, the brain stem. So they've got too much activity basically where the brain is emotional, and too little activity where the brain is executive or kind of functioning, or the executive functioning center. So we can see that a lot of brains are like that. Really, I mean, probably, I don't know, 5 out of 10 brains, 8 out of 10 brains, they're very similar to that. I don't know, some of you might be going, oh, yeah, that's kind of me. Well, that certainly was me, that's for sure. And so what we can then do is we set up a training plan where we're going to encourage the brain to create more beta activity in the prefrontal cortex, yes, and decrease beta activity in the emotional centers of the brain. And you can see that if we were going to do that, then all of a sudden we've got more brain power and activity going to the prefrontal cortex so we can think and be on and focus, and we're less emotional and dysregulated. I mean, what an extraordinary thing. So the way that we do that is we basically just use the computer program, this amazing bit of software with a bit of insight from ourselves, but not too much. And we create you a program, and then basically you're going to train various parts of your brain for 20 minutes. And how are you going to do that? Well, you're going to wear your headband, and then sometimes we'll put this gelled, electrode on your head in a certain location. And then you're going to be watching your phone, yeah, or your iPad or your computer screen. And you can choose a game or you can choose a video, you can watch YouTube. Let me explain what happens. Say, for example, you chose YouTube. You would put up your YouTube video, your 20-minute or 30-minute YouTube video to watch. But here's the thing. The actual screen as it's presented through the app is going to look a little bit dark or a little bit kind of fractured. It's not going to be a particularly clear screen. And your brain is going to watch that and go, hang on a second, that screen isn't clear. I want it to be clear. Why isn't it clear? And then all of a sudden, it gets clear. And the brain goes, oh, I just increased beta activity in the prefrontal cortex and it got clear. I wonder if I do that again, it will get clear again. And then it does. And the brain creates more of that and it gets clear again. And then the brain reduces activity and it gets clear. And the brain's like, hey, look what I can do. I can clear the screen by basically giving more or taking away, or lessening activity in these brain waves. And so what we're doing is we're training the brain in that way. Now, the fascinating thing is you, just like me and Rob, when we first trained, is we try to use our minds to do it. We're like, get clearer, get clearer, get clearer. You can get clearer. But you can't because this is a non-conscious, unconscious process. And it's your brain that is doing it, not your conscious mind that is doing it. And that's a big thought, but that is the thought. And you remember that your brain is operating very, it's like a completely different system to your mind, like we've been talking about. And you think that you're your mind. And yeah, there's a lot of you that is your mind, but there's a whole lot of you that is your brain as well. And so your brain runs independently of your mind in relationship to and independently of. Yeah. And you know that anyway, because you can be having wishful thinking about positive activities and positive outcomes, but still feel anxious and stressed at the same time. That's your brain, you know what I mean? Doing completely different things to what your mind wants you to do. And so with this incredible bit of training, yeah, where we're basically rewarding the brain for creating the optimal brainwave patterns that are needed, that's the neurofeedback. The last thing I'll say, and I'll bring Robin again, is think about it like this. I never played golf very well, and I tried, and it was all right, but I never really enjoyed it very much. It was a bit of a waste of time. Sorry to all the golfers there, but if you love it, you love it. But the one thing that I did enjoy about learning to play golf for the first few sessions is they basically filmed me doing a golf swing, and then they put that on a video and compared it to a professional golfer's golf swing. And I could see just how bad my swing was. You know, I looked like I was wielding a baseball bat or a hammer, you know, and then the professional golfer had this beautiful swing. And so I could literally see very clearly. And this is a very important part of learning that hardly anyone does. At the moment, I'm doing some kind of gymnastic stuff. And in my brain, I think, oh, I've got that pattern and I look like this. And I've got this idea about how I look and what I'm doing. But then when my instructor videos me and I look at it, I go, what? It's completely different to what I think I'm doing. And it's that external feedback that allows me to make changes so much more easily than my own self-awareness. Because the big thought process that most therapists don't understand is actually our self-awareness is a bit shit. It's not great, you know? And if you don't believe me, go and do some physical thing and think about what you think you look like whilst doing it, and then have someone video you, and you'll go, yeah, right, that's not what I thought I was doing, you know? And it's the same that when you go and publicly speak and someone videos you, you're like, what? That is completely different to what I thought I looked like, you see? So our ability to be self-reflective or self-aware is actually nowhere near as good as what everyone claims. But when we have something that gives us accurate feedback, we can grow so much more quickly from it. And I've let you into a little secret, but that's why neurofeedback is so much more powerful than meditation. Because meditation is nice, but it gives very low quality feedback as to what's actually changing. And in fact, I've mapped countless people who have meditated for years. In fact, I meditated since I was 4 years old. Didn't fucking change a thing. Yeah. So excuse my French. And I've mapped plenty of people with brainwaves who have meditated, and they think they've got self-awareness, but they don't. It's very similar to the video of when you're doing physical activity. What they think they're doing and what's actually happening are two very different things. Over to you, mate.
It's very true. I've sat on a few mountains myself. And what I found through this process is my brain assumed that that state was orderly. And even though I'd be sitting in a meditative lotus position and omming myself away, the self-talk, the rumination, all that went on in my head was certainly not what any instructor was telling me how I should be. Yet the brain considered that to be orderly. And it wasn't until it had, through the neurofeedback, where it got a sense on the screen that actually there was chaos. And what was happening through the signals was chaotic on the screen. It then began to self-analyze itself and realize, well, if that's chaotic, what happens when I do this? Well, that's less chaotic. And over time, you know, yes, the aim is to have a unicorn state, which would be that green band that we saw on the printout before. And yes, it's nice to have extended periods of that. The aim is to be able to, if and when life gives us lessons, experiences where we may become hyper aroused, or we may go into flight or fawn mode and go hypo, our resilience to come back into a more ordered level of operating in the world is a lot quicker. And that is done directly through the training. Once the brain has a sense of what order actually is, both from a visual, auditory, sense of the body, then it has a roadmap. Whereas at the moment, it's just flying along any freeway and taking any turn off and doing any intersection. I'll speak to my own experience. that's pretty chaotic in anyone's mind. So, and that's the thing, the mind is then interpreting that chaos and then wondering, why am I not good enough, or how come I can't be this om state? Yet it really is the hardware in the background has no comparison to what calm really is.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I've been kind of saying this for 15 years, and I understand, yeah, things have changed. But 15 years ago, when I kind of said, a lot of this meditation, it's not what everyone thinks. People really used to get angry with me, like truly angry. And when I understand, I'm taking away their comfort blanket. And I wasn't trying to take away their comfort blanket. I was trying to swap it for something that was more useful. But they were holding on. I mean, the whole irony that they get annoyed that I was challenging meditation is ironic in itself, because why wouldn't you remain regulated? Your meditation. But and it's not that I don't think that meditation has its place, but it's just not great. And the reason why it's not great is because it doesn't give accurate feedback like we talked about. Okay. And neurofeedback just allows you to get the claimed outcomes of meditation in a consistent, verifiable way. And I think that's what's just amazing about it. You know what I mean? So if you want to meditate, by all means meditate, because who's going to stop you? You're going to do what you're going to do. But maybe you're just attached to a certain feeling, and that's feeling might not be really the true outcome that you think that you're getting.
Mm,
I've always said the problem with like therapy is, or a lot of coaching or meditation or a lot of these breath work or a lot of these kind of more new age things or even a lot of clinical psychology, to be honest, is like we said before, people think that you're going to change through getting insight or feeling a bit better. Okay. And both of those things are mostly not true. Yeah. If I go to my therapist and I get a little bit of insight about my problem or about myself, that's great, but it doesn't mean the problem has changed. I remember seeing that when I used to run the phobia clinic, and I've resolved thousands of phobias, and people would come in and they'd know more about the phobia than I did. They would know everything about this phobia. They had talked about it. They knew all the insight about it. They knew everything about it. And they could sometimes get relief from it, you know what I mean? But they didn't ever resolve it. They still had a phobia. And then I'd go and run a few cool NLP and hypnosis processes, and they no longer had their phobia. They're like, oh, right. That's what it's like not to have a phobia. It's not what they thought. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't information or knowledge or feeling better. It was simply
yeah.
just not having the problem.
Yeah, which is in direct correlation to this work. Until I'd done the training, I didn't know that I was chaotic. It wasn't until I'd had this experience of doing a training program, having my brain mapped, that I realized that the state that I was once in was far less optimal than what I made myself believe.
Yeah, totally. I remember there was one profound moment I had when I was brain training. I went to these new guys and they mapped my brain. And the reason I'd gone there is because I had resolved really my phobias and my anxieties. But there was this one thing that would always annoy me. And I used to call it my ghosting anxiety, the ghost of anxiety. And
Mm,
even though it never kicked in, there was always this sense that it could. Yeah. There's always
mm,
this sense that the anxiety could come back. And I was like, well, I know it's not going to come back. And it was a very strange experience. Anyway, so I went to see these neurofeedback practitioners about it. And they said, well, here's the interesting thing. Your brainwaves show unequivocally that it wouldn't matter how much therapy or emotional processing you did, that was never going to go. And the reason is because the brainwave is showing that it is a physical concussion pattern. Because again, as we probably gather about me, I used to do a lot of stupid activities and I used to play rugby and box and I got KO'd and I had but this particular result was a result of a mountain bike accident where I hit my head and I was completely done for months.
mm,
So the ghosting anxiety was not an emotional, it was a brain. Yeah.
mm,
And through the neurofeedback, it took about 20 sessions, it went. And I remember the moment because I just finished the training sessions and I'm driving home, and all of a sudden, again, this space appeared in my head. It just, and it was profound. I mean, this profound moment of, yeah, right.
yeah.
It's different, and it was just an amazing, yet another amazing experience of the software hardware. a lot of my problems were due to faulty software, beliefs about self and,
Mm.
problems like that. But a lot of my problems were also literally physical hardware issues and
Mm.
profound, profound.
Yeah, I hear you. And my experience was more from a different angle, but similar. Having been labelled with clinical depression and acute social anxiety and been medicated to the hilt for many years, and in the state that I first met you. And as I did the training and for full transparency, are no longer under any medication, good food, nutrients. One of the things I noticed was the brain fog, which at times throughout my adult life was a sign of either depression or an onset of something. And it's a bit like you're ghosting. It was this always there, and it within a couple of weeks it wasn't,
Mm,
and there was no attachment to, oh, well, it's not there anymore. And it wasn't even a symptom of depression. It was just that my delta was so overpowered, and because I was so hyperactive in one part of my brain that the other part of my brain was trying to compensate. So I would get this hardware sensation, which we call brain fog. And
mm,
within a very short period of time, it was gone. And yes, the space, the literally the daily energy that it opened up for me was, again, as like you, profound.
mm. Yeah, amazing story, man. Amazing, amazing. So let's just sum up before we kind of like finish, okay, and give you a sense of how you can work with this and the best if you want to work with us or on your own. So remember that what neurofeedback is the ability to both map and train brain waves. Now, this is important because there's a lot of neurofeedback equipment out there that doesn't do the mapping. So when you've got brain training equipment that does the mapping, it's called QEEG neurofeedback, okay? And there are certain products out there. There's one that I purchased many, many years ago called Neuro Optimal, and I paid $17,000 for that as well 10 years ago. And it really was a bit crap. I'm sorry. I'm sure all the Neuro Optimal people are going to start throwing shoes at me through the screen. I apologize for telling the truth. At best, it's a slight relaxation device, and I went toe to toe with the company and I got my money back, from that product. That's my personal experience with that. And the important thing is for all the money that was spent on that piece of equipment, it didn't even do brain maps, it didn't brain train, it didn't do anything like that. So do be careful because even though you can now buy the actual hardware itself, that you need for around $500-600. Yeah. So, you don't need to be spending $17,000. The hardware is really, really remarkably cost effective now. The only thing that you're going to pay for is kind of access to different kind of software systems, for example. Yeah. So the reason why you might spend more with training with us is just we have just state of the art software. Yeah. But the actual hardware itself, which you would get to keep with us anyway, is anywhere between kind of what, probably 500-600 bucks, something like that, isn't it? Around that much.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's any need to be spending, So all I'm saying is buyer beware. You don't need to be spending $17,000 or anything. You just that world has gone. I did it for you.
Thank you.
I did it for you twice, so you don't need to do that anymore. Yeah. Then there are other bits of brain training kit that are really quite good, like this one called Mendy, for example, and it works in a slightly different way. This is called HEG or fMRI training, and that basically uses a far infrared system to measure oxygen and blood flow into your prefrontal cortex. Okay. And it's basically an app that teaches your brain to focus through neurofeedback, getting reward, and it encourages you to get more blood flow into the prefrontal cortex. And I think that that's great, and it can help with focus and certainly executive function. But I wouldn't say it's okay. It can help a little bit with things like anxiety and trauma, but it would be a milder version, but still a good kit. And sometimes I use that, for a few weeks just to get that. And that's going to cost you about kind of $300 or something like that. So a really cool piece of kit. Okay. But it's not going to give you the brain maps, and it's not going to allow you to train the brain like we've been speaking about. Another company that I used to work with as well, called Brain Trainer. I brought their big kit to do all the kind of mapping. But then they brought out a piece of equipment about a year ago called State Changer. And that one's a little bit like Mendy, but just a little bit of an upgrade to Mendy, because this one trains you to not just kind of go into focus states, but also into complete kind of relaxation and let go states. So it kind of trains your brain to go like this, and then like this, and like this, and then like this. And that's great. And again, you will notice some subtle benefits and, and a nice bit of kit. But to be honest, I think now, having gone into the modern world with what's out there now is Muse do two different headsets. They do this kind of classic Muse like this, that we use to do the QEEG, and that's all you need to do our style of brain training. Yeah. But they now do another version that I believe is called the Athena, and they basically combined this Mendy one and this together, which you can use as well. Okay. And so that one costs, it's a decent amount of money, kind of costing about $700 or something, but that would be the optimal one to buy if you really wanted the ridgy-digi thing at home. However, I am going to caution you, even with the Muse headsets, I'm going to caution you. And that is, of course, they want to make money and of course they want to do loads of things. But to do that, they're going to offer you loads of apps and loads of kind of like steak knives and bells and whistles and all of this meditation stuff. And I think personally that wears away at the main reason why you want to get involved in this. Yeah. All of those little tricks and games are okay. But the main reason you're doing it is to get a brain map and get a brain training. It's so you can get the outcomes that me and Rob have been speaking about. Okay. And so we have on-sided with a company called Mind Lift, an American company called Mind Lift. We've on-sided with that company to offer practitioner-grade QEEG neurofeedback. Okay, so that's what we offer because that's what I believe is to be the best, system there is. Certainly for home training, so you can do it at home. So if you work with us, we'd get you a piece of kit sent out. We would invite you to our kind of dashboard and our training center, and then we would have you, do a brain map and then set you up. Now, there is an important distinction I want to make, and I'm going to hand back over to Rob. And that is in neurofeedback, there's a lot of people, again, like in anything, like associations and clinicians and practitioners. And there is a whole band. So neurofeedback is split into basically brain training and neurotherapy. Yeah. And so you could think of neurotherapy as like the clinical psychology version of it. And you could think of brain training as the more, I suppose, coaching version of it, for want of a better way of saying things. And even though we've got some certification, that's required to do this through the company, I absolutely am not wanting to go down the neurotherapy route, because I think that actually moves away from what we're trying to achieve. Okay. So neurotherapy is like psychology or like psychiatry. It's trying to treat a particular issue. Yes. And then you're going to get relief from that particular issue. And I just don't think that that's how the brain works. And I don't think that's how life works. A person I used to do brainwave training, he explained it to me this way. And I've always been really appreciative of what he said to me. He said, it doesn't matter how good you get at neurotherapy or neurotraining or brain training, you never really know what the brain is going to resolve first. The brain is an efficiency mechanism. So say, for example, you went to see a neurotherapist for anxiety, but say, for example, you also had a lack of focus and you had insomnia. Yeah. The brain is going to start resolving the thing that it thinks is taking the most power away from it. Yeah, that's taking up the most kind of, gunking up the system the most. So all of a sudden the client might go, well, I'm sleeping kind of better now, but I've still got anxiety. And it's because the brain has decided it's insomnia that's doing the biggest drain. So it wants to solve that before it deals with the anxiety. And so that point alone really steered me away from going down the neurotherapy route. Yes. And it really made me realize, actually, I think the aim of the game is to just train the brain from wherever it is, from whether it's a hypo brain or a hyper brain, and just to begin to train it into this optimal zone, this zone of regulation. And in doing that, all the hyper and the hypo problems will begin to dissipate, especially if you use our kind of mind training, technology that we provide as well. Thoughts about that, Rob?
That's why the approach works. Is we've chosen to take the biases of a label out of this whole approach. So what we're doing is we're looking at a brain how it operates and comparing it to, as we said before, millions of points of data that says good optimal brains look like this.
Mhm.
And we identify where it is that the optimization is required, and we train that area, regardless, if you want to call it ADHD, depression, PTSD, whatever you want. However, what we're doing is taking that bias out of going, oh, well, it's a particular thing and you'll need this. It's rather, this is the brain, this is where you want it to go, and this is how you do it. And over the period of the program, interacting with myself, doing the brain mapping, which would be done multiple times. So you'll have a sense of where you'll physically see where your brain is at the beginning of the program, how it's progressed, and where it is at the end of the program, and then a decision whether or not you would decide to continue. There may be more that you'd like to do. The initial program is to get into a habit, start to see results, start to understand what it's like to live an optimized life and be supported around that. So that's what excites me about this approach using this technology. And yeah, it's unique in what's out there at the moment, I believe.
Yeah, I think so. It's like the old chemistry game. Everyone keeps on trying to play chemistry with themselves, like we have, and again, I understand everyone has their place. And I think you as a person have to choose what you want to do. And I think there are just levels to what you're going to, enjoy. Like back in London many, many years ago, I trained as a naturopath. I don't claim to be one now because I'm well out of date and that was like 30 years ago, and I got rid of my qual like 25 years ago. Although at the moment I am training to be a nutritionist again, but for a particular reason. But here's the thing, over all the years that I've trained and studied nutrition, the honest truth is eating a simple, nourishing diet. I personally choose animal based, yeah, has resolved all of the nutritional problems. Does that make sense? I've just done something really basic and really simple and really consistent, and it's resolved all the nutritional because I don't play chemistry with myself anymore. Yeah. And if you go and see a psychiatrist, they're going to play chemistry with your brain, even though um, the um, research is showing that trying to resolve an issue chemically with a particular chemical is not great. Most problems are psychosocial problems, or so. I suppose what I'm trying to get at is the irony is being more general about it. Yes, more simple and general. I know that sounds counterintuitive, is often more powerful than being hyper focused and biased, really, if we're going to really be honest about it. Now, you might agree, you might disagree, that's fine. If you agree with us, you're going to work with us. And if you don't, you're not, and I totally respect that. But that's just, I have been doing this work for over 25 years at the highest level, of mind, training and now brain training with world champions and Olympians and thousands of students and 10,000 client sessions. It's, I have had an incredible amount of experience. And as I've gotten older and more experience, I truly know that less is more. Yes. And I really do believe that. But anyway, let me finish by telling you what we can offer, because I've given you all the leads that you need to go and research it for yourself. What we offer is a 6-week program. We call it the Limitless program. And the reason we call it the Limitless program is kind of cool because it's after that movie. You remember that movie with Bradley Cooper, Limitless. And Bradley Cooper at the beginning of the movie, he's kind of down and out, he's unfocused, he's disheveled, he's, trying to get his life in order, he's trying to get this book published, but he's just all over the shop. And then, of course, he takes his magic pill, doesn't he? NZ428 or whatever it is. And all of a sudden, his brain just goes, and the next thing you know, he's dressing sharp, he can communicate amazingly, he knows what to do and how to do it, and he's just this optimized version of himself. And that really does feel a little bit like personally my life. I was definitely Bradley Cooper 101, and then Bradley Cooper 2.0 in my own way as a result of what I've done. And that's why it's called Limitless, just so that you know, because I'm really wanting to show you there's A version and there's B version. A ruminates, thinks, does all the usual stuff, tries to get insight, tries to feel better, blah, 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 blah. And then there's option B, the limitless version of yourself, which just trains the brain, trains the mind, and gets on with it. Okay. Interestingly, by the way, is neurofeedback has actually been shown to increase IQ. How about that? So we really are moving towards the limitless zone. So over 6 weeks, we work with about 10 people at a time, and everyone gets their training kit. And we do an induction, kind of half day where we kind of make sure that everyone's got their brain maps, everyone's up to speed. And then we start doing a bit of mind training as well. We start helping you with your identity, sense of self, getting clear about what your goals are, and making sure that your software can actually help you reach your goals as well as your hardware can help you reach your goals. And then over a 6 week period, you're going to be training 3 to 5 times a week, you know what I mean, with your brain training. And then you're going to have a live coaching call with me and Rob once a week, where again, we start doing more of the mind work as well. So there's once a week, we do this big bit of mind change. And then you've got the brain changing happening consistently, throughout the week. And over a 6 week period, that's going to be, a lot to begin to move the needle, shift things, and really get things noticeably different. Over that 6 week period, you're going to get brain mapped 3 times. So you're going to see that brain map that we showed you, 3 different versions of that. So you can see the improvements and see the change. At the end of the 6 weeks, if you've got what you want and you feel amazing, more power to you. You get to keep the kit and you can go and do your own version of meditations and stuff with it in their own programs. If you want to continue doing the more state-of-the-art brain training, then you can just kind of keep on going with us for a nominal fee to keep the training. So that's really what we offer. Rob?
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's exciting. The work that we've put in and what we're bringing to this is, yeah, it's limitless, and it's from our own experience. It's we've done this. We're bringing this to you who are listening, watching, and it's going to be exciting to support you and watch you become limitless.
Yeah, nice one, matey. So I hope you've enjoyed it. We've probably gone on for quite a long time. I hope it was really informative. If you are interested in joining the program, then just go to themindacademy.com. So www.themindacademy.com and click on the Limitless link. We've got our own particular website for that, but also a page of it on the website. And then join the waiting list or give us an email and we will get you suited and booted in the neurofeedback world as soon as we possibly can. But thanks so much for spending some time with us. Thanks, Rob. Really appreciate it, mate.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Let's be limitless. Take care, guys. Speak soon.